Wow, we got over 20 verses done today. Woo. All right, so this is called the Afterburn, where we take comments or questions about the teaching. I hope the teaching has been a blessing up to this point. The next part we should be going into, we'll be starting to discuss the idea of neighbor, loving your neighbors yourself, okay? We're going to be now shifting finally into that with part 28. That's where we're going to go. I needed to complete this part in John first, okay? At least that's my intention. By the time I actually finish writing it, it may be different, but that's where I'm planning to go. Okay, so if you're here and you have a question or comment, raise your hand. Steve will go around with the mic. If you're on live stream, Rob and Kurt will be monitoring that. We'll begin here with Stephanie.
Thank you. As you were reading through verse 19, so it says, yet a little while and the world no longer sees me, but you shall see me because I live and you shall live. It made me think about the what he might mean by living, and it took me back to Deuteronomy 8. So excuse me first. Okay, so Deuteronomy 8:1 says, guard to do every command which I command you today, that you might live, and shall increase and go in, and shall possess the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers. So if there is a connection between what he said, the thought, and forgive me, it's not a fully formed thought because it only happened in the midst of you speaking, but I'm thinking about the audience that Yeshua would have been speaking to, which are Jews of the time who are in the land, but it is ruled by Rome at that point. And to me, it seems like this entire section is also an exhortation for them to continue in this, because even though they're in the land, it's not in the way he promised them or intended for them. And that is yet a promise to be fulfilled in the future. And it's kind of like an encouragement for them to continue following the commands so that they can ultimately have what was promised back in Deuteronomy. Because if you read the whole Deuteronomy 8, it really goes into how they're going to get the land and prosper and all those things.
Absolutely. Amen. Look, it also connecting up a lot of things to Deuteronomy. Look, you could do a whole word study. Maybe we'll do a whole teaching on that we did love in Torah. We'll do life in Torah. Okay? Because we're told that these things are to bring life. Moses says, I lay before you life and death. Choose life. Yeshua said in John 14:6, right? I am the life, so you're going to see me and live. Live how? Through me, through Torah observance, through the light, through the commandments, through all those things. Well, I'm glad you made those connections. Lots of connections to Deuteronomy, in the things that Yeshua was saying, so that we can embrace and understand. All right, who's next? Okay, Billy.
Wow, Rabbi. This teaching is probably, I don't know. It just made so many connections, just boop, 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 all over my brain. So tremendous teaching. One thing that was one of those boops in my brain is when you were talking about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, or the indwelling of the Spirit. I thought about when the Spirit came upon Mary to the birth of Yeshua. That came into reference. I was like, wow, so now I understand it better now that you explain the context. So that popped in. Then I thought of a movie reference, because you always tell us about movies, and I can never remember any movie that you're talking about when you say, hey, did you see that movie? You remember this? But one that I remembered as you were talking about it was actually Superman, where he went back home in this little thing, he put the crystals in and began to tell him who he was. So throughout this teaching, just so many connections helping us to identify who we are. Identify how we fit into this story, how we fit in being covenant, and how all those connections make sense. And adding this piece that, as you said in the beginning, how the guy said that you didn't have the Spirit because you didn't speak in tongues, and how those connections made sense, that I don't have to because that was the wrong context, and to know that he dwells within us and that we have a helper and that
Amen.
That he loves us so much to give us his son, and that if we will obey his son and follow in his footsteps, that we one day would be with him again. So, thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Billy. you know. And there are probably a few people that were watching online when I said that I don't speak in tongues that probably turned it off and decided, oh, well, he's no good. Okay? I'm gonna say the same thing if I'm gonna hope I'm not overstepping any bounds. But as Yeshua said, I think every teacher who's a genuine anointed appointed should be able to say the same thing. If you don't hear him, then you shouldn't be listening to me. Okay? Same thing with Yeshua. If you're not hearing his, don't believe me, believe the words, believe the works, believe. So my role as teacher, so if you're going to say, well, but my criteria says that you have to be speaking in tongues and this and that and the other thing, well, that's your criteria. How about listening to what's coming out of my mouth and use that criteria? Okay? And that's really what needs to be there. Oh, but I don't like the way you deliver it, and I don't like your personality. I don't think the Father cares. He picked me to do this and knew I was going to be this way. Okay? And so I don't think you would have liked the way some of the people you read in the scriptures delivered their messages. I mean, Paul called those Galatians stupid, basically. I mean, he did. He said, you foolish or stupid. I mean, depends on the translation, but he basically, depending on how you read the Greek, called them stupid. Would you have liked that? Of course not. But would you have been willing and ready to receive that message? Okay? That's one of the ways he might test you, is like, I'm going to give you a message, but I'm not going to give it to you in the form you want it. Are you still going to be able to receive it? That could be challenging. All right, who's next? Hey, Steve?
All right, you spoke a little bit about it, but I wanted to make a comment. You said the miracle strengthened the belief, but I had a thought. I said, why is it we're looking for the flashing lights and sirens when, to name something a miracle, when we take a minute and look in our daily lives, we'll find more impressive things than that. Just to give you a little something, I got a text. My calendar's full till Passover now.
Amen.
So that, to me, is a miracle.
All right.
So I just thought maybe we should redefine what a miracle is and stop looking for the flashing lights and sirens and start looking within.
All right, look, I'm going to say something, and again, I want you to hear this from a place of humility, not from a place of pride or ego. But those of you that were out there looking, it's a miracle that you found a teacher who teaches like this, because there isn't anybody else out there that does. I'm very humbled that he uses me the way he does, but I can't, because a lot of times people say, oh, I found this guy, he sounds just like you. I don't know, does he have the same accent? Because I don't hear the teaching the same, okay? And again, that's not me trying to have pride or ego. I'm just saying is if this is what you were looking for and he brought you here and connect, if he had you have that sidebar little thing pop up on YouTube as a recommended video and you found this and this is what you were looking for, that's a miracle as well. Oh, by the way, we have 27,000 subscribers now. Right? I forgot to mention that during the announcements. The guys back there said they noticed it on the feed that we are up to. Now, again, that's not about us. Hey, look at how great we are. It's about we're reaching people. Okay? And by the way, those with a more gentle message, those with a more Christianized message, they don't have 27,000 subscribers. They have 127,000 subscribers or 50,000. See, so to get this message with that many subscribers, I think is incredible. That's a miracle in itself because this is not a popular message. Okay, and a lot of you have friends that you've tried and you know it's not popular, which means that the deliverer of the message generally isn't that popular. Okay? Now that happens. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but we're big fans. We appreciate what you do. But the message and the messenger with those who can't receive it, it's not popular. Yeshua, by the way, was not popular with a lot of people. They didn't like the way he delivered messages. They didn't like what he was and what he said, and they didn't follow him. But so you can look for your miracles in all kinds of places. But you know what? If you look at where you were and where you are now, there's your miracle. Okay? And so that's where you also have the Ruach as the one that connected you and resonated with you and said, wait a minute. I'm hearing the Father now. I'm finally hearing the Father and explain through a vessel what he meant when he wrote these words through these writers. That's all I hope to do, is get out of the way. My notes for today was to get through John 14. Everything else was just what he gave me to say today, okay? Because, now, of course, I've read through it and had an idea that I wanted to focus on who is the you he's talking to and what does it mean to be a believer, that kind of thing. But everything is just, I just wanted to be, Father, say what you want. I'm just going to start talking, all right? And so I know we say this over and over, but that's a miracle too. And I know what it's like to be in your chair, because I did have a large time in my life where I was not the teacher. And I looked for this. And if you want to know why I teach the way I do, well, partially it's just my personality and everything else, but because I teach the way I would want to hear it. What I would want, in other words, the information that I'm looking for. I teach, don't beat around the bush, don't hint, just tell me what it says. Just go ahead and get in my face. I always wanted somebody stand up there, and a few times I had some people get up there and do that. I loved it when they did that, even though it was off here a little bit, but at least the approach was to try to just say it, okay? Don't cushion it, don't coddle it, just, what is it? Just tell me so I can get it right. And so I know what it's like to be sitting where you are. And if I had found this, I'd have been excited too, because this is what I would be looking for. And by the way, I'm always looking for it. If you ever come by my office or come by my house, you'll find I am always sampling other teachers out there, trying to find similar things. Who can I connect with that's out there, and I haven't found it? It doesn't mean it's not there, okay? And if you find it, please tell me. But I'm just saying so does that make this a miracle or not? I mean, does that make this something what are the odds of where you were finding this in Cleveland, Tennessee? How many of you, if you went back to your high school yearbook, it said, voted most likely not to end up in Cleveland, Tennessee? You know? I mean, is that where they thought you were going to end up? I never would have figured going to school in Manhattan and everything else that I would end up in Cleveland, Tennessee. Okay? And I love Cleveland, Tennessee. I didn't even know there was a Cleveland, Tennessee. I thought Cleveland was in Ohio. What did I know? Okay? I mean, I grew up in New York. We knew, New York City. I knew where Chicago was. That was like halfway to LA. That's all I knew. I mean, you know, we don't know geography coming from that place. And so, Cleveland, Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, where's Tennessee? Look, I used to drive up and down to Florida. I never knew there was a Tennessee because I would go down 95 because I was going to the East Coast and never passed through Tennessee. Went through the Carolinas, went through Georgia. I didn't ever get to Tennessee. And here I am in Tennessee for 9 years with this ministry. That's a miracle. And for what we're doing under the conditions we're in right now, wouldn't be able to do this in a lot of different cities right now with the conditions that the world's in. He set this up exactly so we could do this. It's amazing. All right, who's next? Okay, Ben?
All right, thank you, Rabbi, and I want to second what Billy had to say. This is just incredible. And by the way, confession time. Hi, my name's Ben, and I have a tendency to hyper-focus on the prophets.
That's okay.
So my comment kind of comes from verse 29, and I put in my notes that this is actually prophecy as evidence. But I want to redefine prophecy to be more in line with how you've put it, and I put in my notes that it's correct teaching and understanding. And it's written that I have told you before it takes place that when it does take place, you shall believe. And I know for me personally, when I came into this walk and when I started keeping Torah and I started seeing the blessings take place in my own life, that my faith was greatly increased. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay, amen. All right, look. So I define prophecy from Scripture. In the first time we read the word prophet or prophesying is with Moses and the spirit that was on Moses being given to the 70, and they started prophesying, is speaking the word of Yahweh with authority. And sometimes that authority is speaking a word about the future. But bear in mind that the only speaking of the future tended to be when there was a need to know, for comfort's sake, that something was going to happen later. Yeshua is saying this now so that they would have comfort knowing that later when it happened, he had told them about it. You see this in the prophets that are talking about the regathering after the scattering. Now, of course, he first told them you're going to be scattered, and then he said you're going to be regathered. But a huge amount of prophecy is simply speaking the word with authority. Everything Moses said was prophetic. He spoke the word with authority. Everything Yeshua said was prophetic. As a matter of fact, there's a verse where it says they recognize that Yeshua spoke not as the other teachers around, but as one having authority. Okay? In other words, they recognized that he was a prophet. The problem is that through the years, prophecy's been like the scriptural version of, someone who reads tea leaves. It has a crystal ball. So it just only speaks the future. Okay? So instead of tarot cards, we have verses. That's not prophecy. There were very few beings that walked the planet that were told to warn the nation about things that were coming. There were lots of people, though, that spoke the word with authority that had nothing to do with telling you what's happening in the future. And hopefully that makes sense. Every apostle was discipled to be a prophet, to speak the word with authority. Okay? What I do here every week, I'm in the role of a prophet. I'm not claiming to be Isaiah. I'm just saying it's speaking the word with authority. So during that time, that's what I'm doing. That's the hat I'm wearing. Okay? Now, when I'm teaching you how to keep Shabbat or the feast or these things, then I'm wearing the hat of a teacher. What to do, when to do it, how to do it. Okay? So there are different roles you can have. Let's not glorify some of these things. Because I know there are people out there very excited. Oh, so-and-so is a prophet. Ooh. Look, if they're a prophet, then they're speaking the word of Yahweh with authority, you might want to just listen. Don't be worried about being impressed with them. They're a vessel. That's all. Be impressed that they're willing to be a vessel, and that's all you need to be impressed with. They could be a very flawed human being, as I am, okay? Yahweh's demonstrating that you can use a very flawed human being to do his work, okay? And by very flawed, I'm just as flawed as anybody else. I know some of you like to hold me up on a pedestal like I'm not, but, that's your mistake, okay? I struggle as everybody else does. My struggles may be similar to yours, may be different than yours, doesn't matter. But when his word is coming out of my mouth, you need to respect his word, not me. Okay? And respect that he uses me for that role. And that's the important thing. Okay? Now, what's next? Who's next? Amy?
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
I got so much out of this that I hope I can articulate it correctly, but it seems to me that it's, I want to say like a cycle, or even maybe I'm trying to figure out what's in my mind, like secular maybe. So when you started out talking about how he was saying that the Father is in him, got so many notes written here from the different teachings that you've done, but I always think about how the intrinsic nature of the Father is in the Son, correct? I guess
Correct.
I'm trying to think through this and then have you tell me if my thinking is right. Okay, so based on that and him trying to get them to understand that he has the intrinsic nature of the Father, right? So when he's doing things, they're seeing the Father because he's doing what he was taught and trained, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. He's the full expression of what the Father would be if the Father himself were here. We would say, oh, he's acting just like him. The Son acts exactly like the Father. He thinks like him. He acts like him.
Right. Okay, so, and then as you went along and he was saying, said, if you love me, you will guard my commands. And then you got down to verse 21 talking about, he who possesses my commands and guards them, it is he who loves me. And then when you were explaining possesses by saying taking the ownership, I thought about if we're taking ownership, then that would become our second nature, our intrinsic nature, right? That's
right.
our
Recognizing
goal.
that it's for you. By
Correct.
ownership meaning that it's for you. It's
Right.
designed for you, it's meant for you. You're supposed to have it.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, and then, we would want to guard that, and by doing that, we would show that we love him. And then, and if we're not going to do that, we're showing that we don't love him.
Correct.
But then what really stuck out to me a lot was verse 31 So if we're doing what he's told us to do to build up our intrinsic nature, also as we're going along doing that, we would ask, in his authority for the help for our intrinsic nature to be changed like him, correct?
Correct?
And that's going to be pleasing, so he's going to help us, correct?
Correct. And it's
Okay.
going to bring him glory and honor.
Yes, all right, yep. And the Father, will be so pleased, like you were using the human being example of the Father and the Son. But in 31, it really struck me when he says, in order for the world to know that I love the Father, and that as the Father has commanded me, so I am doing. Like, I'm showing you this example. I'm asking you to do this stuff, and now I'm going to do what the Father has commanded me to do.
Yep.
Do you see where I'm going?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did
And by the
you-
way, that's why when Yeshua is having his last breath, what does he say? He says, I have finished what you gave me to do. Not it, like everything is finished, but you sent me here to do this. I've accomplished everything you gave me to do in this flesh suit. So it's complete. I've done what I needed to do. I haven't done what you needed to do. I haven't done what you needed to do. I haven't done what anybody else needed to do. I did what you sent me here to do. Job complete. This task, now of course he's coming back and there's other tasks, but that mission, that thing that he was given to do, he said, it's finished. I've done it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So then, with that being said, he's telling them that he's leaving, peace I leave with you, and don't let your heart be troubled and don't be afraid, because when he's doing that, he's doing what was commanded to him, but it doesn't mean it was going to be easy.
Correct.
So we should never think that even though, that things we're going to have to do to change our intrinsic nature are going to be easy.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let me just add a couple of things real quick. Hold on. Okay. Two things. One is, and you can go ahead and sit. Okay. One is that I want to make sure that it's clear that when he says certain things, he wouldn't say it unless the thing could happen. In other words, when he says, don't let your heart be troubled, he knows that your heart will likely be troubled. When he says, stay in me, it's because you might leave. You see what I'm saying? We have to always look at his statements to realize, wait a minute. He's saying it because this thing is likely and possible. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to say it. Why would he have to say it unless it was possible and likely to happen if he didn't say it? Okay, so when he says, my peace I leave with you, and he says, and let not your heart be troubled, because he knows your heart's probably going to be troubled. And so you need to know this is coming, and I'm trying to give you my peace. So just always look at things from that point of view. We talked about that quite a bit when we were in John 15, when he says, stay in me. Well, why would he have to say it unless you could leave? Okay? And so that's important. The other thing is, I know I say this a lot, and I want to make sure that you're not thinking that somehow the Creator wants some sort of Stepford-looking robotic things, okay? We're going to think like him, act like him. But you know what? He had disciples that all thought like him and acted like him. But I think we can agree that John was very different than James, who was very different than Peter, who was very different, who was, you know what I'm saying? All right? So they had their own personalities, but they were becoming Yeshua-like. They were behaving like and acting like, but in their own flavor, with their own personality. I'm sure that when we meet the Father and the Son, they will be very different and yet very much exactly the same. Okay? They will be very different. They're individuals. They're going to have their own sort of personalities or whatever that is for those kind of beings. But yet they're going to be echad. Their approach, their focus, their goals, their mission, all of that stuff is going to be echad. They're going to be completely congruent. But yet they're not going to be exactly the same. Just like he expects all of us to become like him, yet you're still going to be very different than me in some ways. I'm going to be different than you, and you're than you, and because he doesn't want us to lose all of the beauty and the fun and the flavor of all the differences that we have. Because that's part of what makes it so much fun. I mean, I had probably the most fun last night, just during the beginning of the Zone 3 thing that we did. listening to all these people introduce themselves and hearing the different tones of voice and their different little things that they felt like they needed to share, because we didn't have really a format. Just share what you little bit you wanted to share, introduce yourself. And some people just said, hi, I'm so-and-so, I live over here. And other people told more about their lives or how they found their connection, whatever. But their personalities were coming out, you know? And it was really enjoyable. And so I just want to say that, because sometimes I think people might think, well, if he wants us all just to be exactly like him, why didn't he just make us that way? Because he doesn't. He wants you to be you who is submitted to him, but still be you, okay? That's, I think, very important. Okay, who's next? Okay, back here, Rabbi Tom.
Thank you. What occurred to me is that Yeshua said all these great and encouraging words while living in the midst of a very cruel and oppressive Roman occupation and political upheaval and turmoil, and yet none of that mattered. None of that bothered him.
Yes, absolutely. And he was demonstrating to people to see that. So people can see, look, he also says in verse 31, we didn't talk about it that much because I was trying to finish before I ran out of time. He says, look, all of this is in order for the world to know. So the world is supposed to be observing these things. Now, the world's not going to know until it plays out, but they'll remember. Okay? The world never thought for a second he was going to resurrect on the third day, but the world was paying attention that he said he would. And so the world put guards at the gate, at the stone, so to speak, right? Guards were there to guard the stone. So the world was paying attention. They weren't believing it, but they were paying attention. So he's saying these are all things so the world will be paying attention and making notes so that when it plays out, they'll be like, oh, at some point the light bulb goes on and they're going to go, I can now piece that together. That's what that was all about. Okay? Who's next? Okay, Janet?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Would it be wrong, to when you were to assume, going back to what you were saying, that Yeshua was always trying to give esteem to the Father, right? And speaking for myself, I kind of take pride that you are my teacher, my rabbi. So when I follow kind of what you're telling us to do, I don't necessarily want to gain esteem, but I obviously before the Father. But if I'm obeying your words because they're coming from him, he's getting the esteem, but you are also getting that esteem. Is that correct?
That is correct. Look, the same thing is esteem gets transferred. So Yeshua is saying, again, in some of the verses we read, so that the Father would then get the esteem, but also that he would esteem the Son. Okay? Because you get esteem or honor for being your role in the structure. When you do what you're supposed to do and function the way he created you, that also brings you esteem. There's a transference of esteem. Okay? So Yeshua esteems the Father esteems him back. We esteem Yeshua, Yeshua esteems us back. If you esteem me, that esteems them for training me, and that comes back, okay? Because all I want for you is to hear the words, well done, good and trustworthy servant. I want you to be welcomed into the kingdom, and so that's to bring them esteem and glory and honor. I appreciate when people say, hey, listen, the teaching was amazing or this or that, but it's not a prideful it just makes me feel good that I accomplished what he gave me to do. Okay? Because if I don't hear that, I'm thinking I must not have done what I was supposed to do. Okay? And it's not like people generally say, your speaking was so good. It's the information cut deep, opened up an understanding, revealed something. Whatever it was a powerful, then I'm like, good. I did my job. I had allowed words to come out of my mouth that he gave me that affected somebody in a powerful way. In that relationship, not the relationship with me, but the relationship with them. Okay? Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
And going back to verse 20, when it says, in that day you shall know that I am in my Father, and you and in me, and I in you.
And of course, he continues all of that by the time we get to chapter 15, and we actually did them out of order. We did 15 before 14, but now you understand where that was leading to.
Yes, and that kind of took me to 1 John. I know, Rabbi, you didn't cover that, but it's related when it says, verse 5 of, chapter 2, but whoever guards my word, truly the love of Elohim has been perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him, again, in him. So my question about the previous verse was, okay, so when we stay in his word, we do the Torah with the fruits of the Spirit, then we become in unity with him. And we can always stray away, and we do, unfortunately, but eventually when we get to the kingdom, we'll be in unity with him forever. Is that correct to understand?
Yeah. Look, and by the way, we're going to go to 1 John as part of the neighbors yourself part because it talks about loving your brother, etc. So we're going to get to 1 John 2 eventually. The thing is, let's kind of use a simple metaphor we're all familiar with. If you're going to live in my house, you're going to live by my rules. And John 14 starts off with, in my Father's house, there's lots of places for you to stay. However, if you're going to live in my house, you're going to guard my commands. Okay? It's a very old, saying, and we all hear it all the time. Our parents probably told us that. Well, you're going to live in my house, you're going to live by my rules. You don't want to live by my rules? There's the door. Okay? And so that same thing applies here. You want to live in his house, you're going to have to live by his rules. How do you demonstrate that? The way you walk out this life. You're not just going to sign a contract that says, I agree to live by your rules. Okay, I don't believe you. Let me see you do it. So you have, how many score and 20 or whatever it is, but you have your lifetime to see what you've got. Okay? I'm going to have you walk it out. You say, okay, you want a covenant? Covenant says, I want to live in your house, and I agree to live by your rules. Okay, that's another way of looking at Exodus 19. Okay? Yahweh says, I'd love all of you to live in my house, but there are rules. If you agree to the rules, you can live in my house. And in my house, everything is taken care of. No issues, no safety issues, no provision issues, no food issues, no anything. You will be taken care of. Okay?
Do you allow me one more, please?
Sure.
Okay. So when it says, chapter 14, 27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. And at the end it says, do not let your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid.
Right.
So we've been reading pretty much all chapter about love linked to obedience. So I guess I got the connection, I don't know if I'm right. Like if we really follow Torah, and we are obedient because we want to show him love, because we love him, then fear should depart from our hearts. Is that kind of the sequence, or do we also need to obviously work on it actively? Thank you.
All right, so we got to connect the dots again. Obedience is half, right? He says he's seeking those that will worship him in spirit and truth. Truth is the obedience. The spirit part is the fullness of the intention. So if you don't have bitachon, if you don't have trust, if you don't have emunah, full faith and belief, your mechanics are still not going to stop you from being afraid. Your mechanics are not going to stop you from being troubled. So you need to have both the mechanics, obedience, okay? Because you can eat right, keep the right days, not murder, not steal, you can keep all the commandments and still be petrified, panicky, troubled heart. So, because you're missing what? The other part of it. I trust you. I believe you. I believe you. What does I believe mean? I believe that when you say, if I do these things, it will all be okay. I believe that. I believe that doing these things will lead to all the good things. Not now necessarily. I may have a lot of challenges in life. I may end up being martyred. But yet, I know it's all going to work for the good. I trust that full picture. So until you can add belief from the point of view of emunah, not belief like Christianity talks about it, to your walk, you're not going to have this. So he's trying to tell you, look, if you love me, guard my commands, all these things. But he also says, but you have to not let your heart be troubled. You have to believe what I'm saying. Trust my words that I will send a helper. You will be okay. You won't be left orphans. You see what I'm saying? You have to trust these things. And if you can't trust them, you'll have the mechanics, but you'll also have that terrible anxiety and fear and insecurities. All right? Next. Richard?
Thank you, Rabbi. I agree. This is a great section. I was looking at 15 specifically, and then when Amy talked about 27, it brought to mind, if you love me, you will guard my commands. And you started out earlier today mentioning the fact that one of the reasons we stay here for multiple hours on end, and then when you dismiss us, we stay here longer, is because we need each other. But that's part of what brought me down here. But I was thinking, last night I got a call from my son, and he's coming to Tennessee to drop my granddaughter off for college. And he was kind of hinting about coming to my house and spending the night, which I would have loved to have him do. And I knew he was coming, but he didn't give me enough warning order. And I was thinking about guarding the commands. And this is the mechanical part, but I had I was not unsettled by doing what I did. I told him he could come, but that we weren't doing anything. In other words, we were going to adhere to the fourth commandment the best we could. And in doing that, I knew if he came, we both like to do woodworking, so we'd probably try to talk about woodworking. We both do military. He's currently in the Army. We'd have talked about, and we didn't want to do any of that. We struggle and we work very hard to guard that command and have sundown to sun up, or sundown to sundown, all his. And that's intensive labor that we're actually reaping the benefits of that, because it creates boundaries that people appreciate, but it also creates boundaries that keep us in that emunah. So I'm hoping, and I'm pretty sure I'll be able to do it, I'll get to see him tomorrow and explain that in greater detail. I would have loved to drag him in here for 4 hours or 5 hours or all night, but he also has a mission of getting his daughter to college.
Right.
So I was thinking about what you've been talking about all day long. It's not, and James, it's not hearers only, but let's do this thing. So we struggle, even amongst Anna and myself, to make sure we stay focused on our Creator for this 24-hour period.
Amen. Amen. Okay. All right, so listen. This came up last night as part of the Q&A, also with the international Q&A that we did. We talked about earlier this idea, oh, well, what are they thinking? And I would be so tough, and I would have all this bravado. Really? So when your family member wants to come and visit over the weekend, are you going to tell them up front what can't come in your house? Are you going to tell them up front you're going to be gone all day Saturday? Or are you going to stay home and try to entertain them? Are you going to stay home or allow them to bring stuff into your house? We've had people with family members that bring all kinds of unclean food in their house when they visit. Well, that's because you let them. Why would you let them bring that stuff into your house? They don't need to eat that. They don't have to eat that at every meal. There's other things that they eat. They eat chicken, they eat beef, they eat vegetarian, they eat whatever. They don't have to eat, that other stuff. So, but the thing is, it's your house. But establish that up front. My folks will never visit me over the weekend. They don't want to come here, and they don't want to be sitting around while I'm here all day. Okay? So they plan when they visit, in the past when they used to visit, knowing full well I was going to be here all day. And I wasn't running home to them. This is my family. This is what I do. Okay? But set the expectation. Don't be embarrassed and afraid. Okay? Look, when I go to visit them and I stay over the weekend, and I'll go up there and I'll do that. They'll know I'm either going to go to, or I'll be sitting in the living room in front of the TV watching the live stream the entire service. I'm not going out to do other things. I'm not going to go and whatever. And they know that. Why? Because I've told them up front. This is not debatable. This is not negotiable. And so in the past, we've had places that we went to, but they were just not as viable as we would have liked them to be. And then other times, we just literally had my children and my wife and I would just sit in the living room watching a live stream if we were in New York doing that. And we would sit there. And sometimes my parents would go out and do other things. That's fine. We're not going anywhere. This is what we're doing. Okay? So I'm proud of you, Richard. Good job with that. And look, some family members will appreciate understanding. Other ones will get all offended, like, what? You wouldn't make time for me, blah, blah. Look, I'm sorry, you're my kid, but you're not my creator. Okay? We are told in Scripture you need to love all of those others less than you love him. That's an instruction. All right? By the way, also when it says guard the commands, this will go back to the things that I think Amy was talking about in that, and the idea of peace, etc. One of his commands is be still and see the deliverance of Yahweh. That's actually a command. Now, he was commanding the Israelites by the water to part, but still, the idea was when you're in those kind of challenges, listen to the fear of Yahweh teaching. I got another one in there. We've named like 15 teachings today. But that's actually an instruction for us to trust him, to be still and see his deliverance. Don't be afraid. And if you're still dealing with fear, you've got to listen to that fear of Yahweh teaching over and over again. Because it's intended to give you the verses that says, basically, if you would only fear him, you would be not afraid of anything else ever again. You would never be afraid. If you had the proper awe and reverence for him, you would trust him. Look at all the panicking that went on in the desert when they left Egypt. Why? They didn't trust him yet. They didn't know him yet. When you don't trust him, you're showing you don't know him. Okay? If you don't show that trust, you don't know him. When you panic, when you have that anxiety about what you're not trusting him, that means that you don't know him. You don't know him as well as you think you know him. Because or I should say this, you haven't completely given yourself over to that authority. You are afraid. You completely covered and immersed in him should never be afraid. So if you're still afraid, you've not completely trusted and given yourself over to him. By the way, when you do that, it doesn't mean horrible things won't happen. You just don't care anymore. You're not worried about that. Things happen, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Most of the things you worry about don't happen anyway. I mean, they've done studies that show that like 85 to 90% of everything you ever worried about never happened. And if it did happen, the next 8 or 10, 15% of that, almost to 100%, it turned out it wasn't as bad as you thought. It wasn't a big deal. Like less than 1% of things that you actually worried about turned out to be as bad or worse than you thought. All right? And yet we worry like crazy. It's a trust issue. Let go and trust him. Amen? Anybody else here? Okay, Chris?
Okay, so I have this kind of crazy theory, though, with John 14.
We don't do crazy theories on Saturday.
Yeah, but it's about John 14. So, with the Godhead, and I know it's hard to understand, God, but with the whole idea of how many and how Yeshua is, with verse 17. And 26 and 28 with the whole idea of the Spirit as a helper. And so if Yeshua he's coming, he's going away and coming back, and he is the Spirit of the truth, and he is the truth, and he is then the Spirit of the way, the Spirit of life. Could you just replace the word Spirit with Yeshua, basically, and say, Yeshua is the Spirit in every way?
Yes and no. Look, he's still not literally dwelling in you. There is this thing called the Ruach, and it's the way that he's able to be in you. It's the way that he communicates. So it's not like when there's a difference, because when he was there physically with them, that's very different than this. Through the Spirit, through the Ruach, he's able to then be with you. So he's trying to explain to them this is now going to change in its form, how I deal with you. There's still an element, this thing called the Ruach. Okay? So it's not literally just Yeshua, but Yeshua, through this thing called the Ruach, is able to now indwell you, is able to communicate with you. Now, this is on a level that's beyond our human comprehension. How do we understand this Ruach thing? It's not a physical thing that we can point to. It's not a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional thing. It's something outside of. But if you listen to all of the verses, Yeshua says, my Father and I are one. My Father and I are one. Not my Father, the Ruach, and I are one. Okay? He never mentions the three that way. All right? There is one verse where it says the Father and the Son and the Spirit agree. That verse was added. Okay? That's not even in Greek or anywhere. So forget about that one verse. There are no verses where he says, me and the Father and the Spirit are all one. It says, I and my Father and him and me, and I and my Father and him and me, my Father and I. He doesn't mention a third being. John 1:1 says 2. In the beginning was the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. 2. Okay? But you have to go through the teaching for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if there are just two beings,
Right, but I don't want it to be that there is a thing called the Ruach, and so it's not, you can't just discount that, but the Ruach is not a being. It's the way the Father or the Son communicate, interact with, okay? It's a power. It's something we can't describe in our physics, all right? We don't have the physics language to describe it, but it's not an identifiable, personified, separate being. That's the key, all right? But I don't want to go in your direction just a little bit because it almost discounts that there is this element called the Ruach, okay? All right? Okay, now, Cole.
Hey, Rabbi. Hey, on verse, I believe, where's it at? I like how verse 23 stuck out to me, and it said, answered him, if anyone loves me, he shall guard my word, and my Father shall love him, and we shall come to him and make our stay with him. I like how it says we and our, and I connected it to verse 2 and 3.
That's excellent. Okay, so, I know I skipped over that verse a little quick, so let's go ahead and look at it real quickly. So if anyone loves me, he shall guard my word, and my Father shall love him, and we, and it's interesting, he said we in capital here, which is, of course, there's no capitals in the Greek, but the person who translated wanted you to understand that we included one of them, because they only get capital letters when it's the Father or the Son. So now it's we, us and them, right? Okay? And it says, we, the Father and Son, shall come to you, but we shall come to him also, because we're going to be in him. That whole idea of the connectivity there. Again, I wasn't trying to be Catholic and all of this stuff with my hands, but, okay? Okay, but it says, look, my Father shall love him, and we, Father and Son, shall come to him and make our stay with him. But also he could have said, we, us with the Son, will go to the Father. We have that going in both directions. I just want us to understand it. You could have put a capital W there, so to speak, and thought of it the other way. I and him and you and me, and all of that we read about also in chapter 15. Okay? The whole idea of being echad, but yet there's a multiple unity. All right? All right, live stream.
Okay, from Norma Silva, John 14, verse 20, he said, on that day we shall know. Did he mean on the judgment day, or is it in the context of the helper coming to the disciples, or his return as a king?
Okay, again, we have to think more Hebraically. It's probably both, okay? Look, he says, yet a little while. Now, he first said he was not going to leave them orphans and come to them. He said, a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you shall see me because I live. And in that day, what day? The day that you see me. All right? Then you are going to know that I'm the Father. And by the way, he could be talking about when he appeared to them on the road, when he appeared to them in the house later after his resurrection. It could be referring to all of these different manifestations of fulfillments of this verse. So let's remember not to think just linearly, but, and instead of either or. Okay, next.
Okay, from Madison, is John 20, verse 29 also connected to what you explained the quote-unquote greater works are from John 14:12?
Yeah, I would say that verse 29, I guess, this is now I told you before it takes place that when it does take place, you shall believe. But he's really talking about his resurrection and sending of the helper. As far as the works are concerned, I have it on in my scriptures underlined. I don't know if I underlined it or my wife did, because I don't usually write in my book. But in verse 16 of chapter 15, it talks about whatever you ask in the Father in my name, he might give you. It talks about the idea of bearing fruit. And we talked about that extensively in the teaching when I talked about John 15 and we got to that verse. So connect up the whole idea of works to the bearing of fruit, and so that's where that connects. But as far as is 29 talking about the works, no, it's actually really talking more about the sending of the helper and that experience. Okay?
Okay, from Joseph Neal, 14, verse 12, would it be correct to say that our works would be considered greater because we start from a fallen state, whereas Messiah is perfect?
I don't see why not. There's lots of ways that we can interpret the idea of greater, okay? But what we're not looking to do is somehow be thinking that somehow they're bigger, more impressive, and mostly Christianity's version of it being signs, wonders, miracles, that kind of thing. Because that's what they think of as works. Messiah's works are the miracles. Well, there's a lot more than that. It's talking about what John 15 was talking about, this bearing of the fruit, the doing of the commandments, and it bears the fruit. And we talked about that quite extensively, so you should know what that means in the previous teachings. So let's connect those dots together. But what you just said, what the person just said from the live stream is absolutely true. Yes, we could certainly say that we, coming from where we are, that could be considered a greater work. We had a much harder challenge than he did. He came from the Father. He knows the full picture. We had to do this on a completely different faith level. We actually are doing greater works than even the apostles did. They at least got to live with him and walk with him. We're just believing a book and our personal relationship. That's all we have, is a personal relationship with an invisible God and a book. Certainly that's harder to get to the same place than if you physically had him with you. Okay? Next.
Okay, from Nakia Andrews says, what exactly does it mean for Yeshua to, quote unquote, manifest himself to us? What would that look like? How would we know it? She said, I'm sorry for my ignorance. But
No, it's a good question. I did try to explain that. It's the idea of revealing. And revealing is not like you see him or have a voice speak to you and that kind of thing. But look, everything in these teachings is essentially my effort to help him be manifested to you. So you can understand him the way he is, what his purpose is, what he's trying to do, who the Father is, what his purpose is, what he's trying to do. So it's a revealing. Okay? And so when he opens your mind and your eyes and your ears, that's the manifesting.
okay, from Daniel Woods, is it possible for a person to follow Torah along with everything Yeshua commanded with no emotional attachment to it and still be in covenant?
I'm not really sure what you mean by no emotional attachment. I mean, there's going to be always in life an emotional response to things, positive or negative. The point is it a response that's appropriate or is it a triggered response? Okay? Because Yeshua said, I came so that you might have your joy filled up to completeness. That's an emotion. Joy is an emotion. Okay? Happiness is an emotion. Fear is an emotion. Anger is an emotion. And so I don't know that you can do things so mechanically that there's no emotion. At some point in keeping Shabbat, it's either going to create the emotion of appreciation and something you look forward to, or it's going to irritate you and be inconvenient. But it's still an emotion. You'll find yourself counting the seconds, or you'll be thinking, I wish there was longer. Again, those are emotion-based thoughts. So I'm not really sure that you can do what you said. I don't think you can actually keep the commandments and have no emotion. Now, you can keep the commandments and have inappropriate and wrong emotions because you're not understanding the point of them, and so it's affecting you in a way that's causing a wrong emotion. Or you could be doing things that have an out of control over the top level of emotion that is emotion that's inappropriate. But I don't think you can walk this out with no emotion. Okay, next.
Okay, from Sarah Beth. Says, I know this was covered, but it didn't get through my filters. What does it mean that the Spirit will be in us? We aren't being possessed. He won't do it for us. How does he help us, and why do we need this?
Okay, so how do I want to put this? When we are born, when he breathes the breath of life into us, there is a small element of the seed planted that connects you to the Creator who made you. And then when he opens your eyes and he manifests himself to you, he's filling you with more of his intrinsic nature so that you can have he says that he will lead you into all truth. He'll teach you all things. In other words, he'll open up your mind so you can see things you couldn't see before. You could have heard these teachings that I'm doing right now. Let's say you've been walking this walk for 5 years, 3 years, whatever. If I had said everything I said today to you 20 years ago, it would have made no sense to you. When you were still either in the world or in a church or wherever you were. But because he has filled you with his Spirit, he's indwelling you, He helps you receive, and light bulbs go on. See, a lot of the comments you're making is because of that Spirit, where you're going, oh, I think I get it. Let me ask the teacher just to confirm, but I'm receiving through the Ruach a connection. And you're now seeking verification through the teacher. But that's a Ruach-inspired thing. And you're trying to see, which Ruach is it, though? Is it me? Is it the Hasatan? Or is it Elohim? Is it yourself, right? And so you could have any of those voices kind of flowing around. And so you ask for confirmation. Am I connecting this right? Which spirit gave me that thought? Is it just me trying to piece things together to justify something I want? We often do that. Or is it the Ruach helping me connect in the way I need to connect it? Because just because I said it, you may need to clarify because I didn't say it the way you needed to hear it to receive it right. We don't all receive communication the same. Which is why you'll hear me often use 4 or 5 different examples of something to make sure that at least one of them will make sense to you. Which is why I like the Afterburn. It gives me a chance to repackage the same thought, but using a different example, metaphor, or something to make the point. So that may be what you needed to hear, and now you go, oh, I get it now, okay? So hopefully that answered the question, Sarah Beth.
Okay, from Nakia Andrews. If the Son is a reflection of the Father, then when the Son manifests himself to us, is that the same as the Father being manifest to us at that moment?
Yes. Okay? And that's what he was basically trying to explain to Thomas and to Philip. Look, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That's what he said it to Philip. Okay?
From Betty Carden, says question. As one who suffered very deep depression, I have a deeper understanding of how truth and light, Yeshua, will bring one out of the deep darkness of depression. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Now, there are some chemical elements sometimes to things like depression, and those are actually physical things. But from a psycho-emotional part, those things can be dealt with. You know, you can build structures in your heart and in your mind that can help you with these things, and a lot of it has to do with bringing, as I always like to say, reality into things. See, if the Father and Son are not real enough to you, then you're going to suffer from a lot of those things because you have not completely embraced that reality. Because in that reality, you are safe. Maybe not in this physical life the way you might want to be, but ultimately. Okay? In that reality, you have nothing to fear. In that reality, whatever happens to you doesn't matter. In that reality, you are provided for, taken care of, and everything works for the good. But you have not necessarily fully embraced that reality. Okay? Next.
Oh, from Norma Silva, different question. Verse 20, was the Ruach promised to the disciples at that time? So at what time or from when is the rest of the covenanted people?
I didn't understand the question. The way it ended, I didn't really understand where it was going. So did they receive the Ruach at that time? And when do the rest of the covenant people receive that Ruach? Look, you receive the Ruach upon covenanting, okay? That's part of what we pray for when we mikvah you and you make your covenantal vows, that the Father would indwell you with the Spirit. Now, you had to have some, or you would never have been able to have your bubble popped and you start looking for truth and recognizing truth, etc. But through relationship, he gives you more and more of that Spirit. And you embrace more and more of, he says, we will come to you. Okay? Start walking this out and we will come to you. The more you walk it out, the more they will want to come to you. Next.
From Brides of the Harvest. Rabbi, is it safe to assume that after your reference to poison and truth, that any non-Torah belief system is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the Torah is the way of life? There's the Torah way of life and is the tree of life.
Okay, you may have to read it one more time. I'm not sure what the question was there.
It says, is it safe to assume that after the reference to poison and truth, that any non-Torah belief system is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the Torah way of life is the tree of life?
I mean, I guess you could put it that way. I don't know that I would do it exactly that way. The Torah is it's the tree of life. But as far as the knowledge of good and evil, look, the other stuff we're talking about is that there's a mixed mess. So I wouldn't just say that it is of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, although the elements of it are there trying to convince you that it's the tree of life. And that's where the confusion is. A good teaching that covers that is, what teaching covers the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Come on. There you go. Developing the character of Yeshua. Good job, Chris. Okay? Developing the character of Yeshua. So I go into a fairly extensive explanation of the two trees. All right? In part 1, I believe. Okay? It's, I think, 5 parts or something like that. All right, next.
Okay, this will be the last one that I've got from Justin and Denise Rodriguez. Verse 28, is this the difference between thinking on the thing above versus the things of below?
Yeah, I think you can do that. It says, you heard that I said to you, I am going away and I'm coming to you. If you did love me, you would have rejoiced. Well, it's not so much if you did love me, but it's like, I guess what you're trying to say is if you understood that the above and the below and the relationship, that my going into the above is going to help you connect to the above, then yes, you would have rejoiced. I can see how you can go there. So from that perspective, I can see how you can go in that direction. Okay? All right. Was that it, Rob?